Sorry, folks, for the technical issues we're having on our end. We'll go ahead and begin our introductions. Monty Helm, if you'll start us off.
Great. Thanks for the opportunity to talk at this webinar today. My career started off with my graduate work at University of Colorado Boulder, after which I did 2 postdocs. I did a postdoc in the University of Sussex, which was a research postdoc in England, and then I did a half-time teaching, half-time research project at the University of Tennessee, Chattanooga. After that, I went into academics. I was a professor at Fort Lewis College for 9 years, and after taking a sabbatical at Pacific Northwest National Lab, I started my career here at the National Lab. So this full disclosure for this webinar, I didn't start off seeking a career at a national lab, but it's where I've ended up, and it's been a great transition. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Thanks, Monty. And Ashvia, if we'll start, we'll let you give a brief introduction.
I actually have been involved with the National Lab since my graduate work. I went to graduate school in Stony Brook University, which is about 40 miles away from Brookhaven National Lab, which is where I did most of my PhD research. From Brookhaven National Lab, I moved to Argonne National Lab as a postdoctoral research fellow. From there, after 3 years of postdoc, I got a staff position to work at the neutron scattering facility, Relation Neutron Source at Oak Ridge National Lab. So I'm a National Lab rat.
Well, thanks, Ashvia. We'll continue. We're still having technical issues with sound, but we're going to continue with the webinar. Mark, if you'll give us a quick bio about yourself.
Sure. Well, I guess I can say I'm a National Lab rat as well. I started my graduate work at MIT and then moved to Stanford when my professor was bought out by that university. So I finished my PhD there, and then I went directly to Sandia National Laboratories in Livermore in California. And I started work at the combustion research facility there, and then I've had several different careers in terms of the technical areas I've worked in, and currently I'm working in materials chemistry in an area called metal organic frameworks. So I've been at Sandia for about 29 years, actually.
Thank you, Mark. And lastly, my name is Leigh Common. I am a third-year PhD candidate in the Department of Chemistry at Washington University in St. Louis. I received my bachelor's degree from Blackburn College in 2010, and I received my master's in organic chemistry from Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville in 2012. I currently work for Sophia Hayes, where my research focuses on the solid-state NMR characterization of inorganic metal oxide precursors and their corresponding thin films. To begin with the format for today's webinar, we will first start off with 2 general questions. Each panelist will have 2 questions to respond to, and we'll rotate between questions. Then I will open up the webinar to a live Q&A with the audience. This should take approximately 30 minutes or so. And during this part of the live Q&A, if you're joining us online, we have a question dialog box where you can input your questions and ask them. And I'll filter the questions and try to get through as many as possible. So, and finally, we'll end with some summarizing points from our panelists, and hopefully they'll provide us with a take-home message. We'll start our general questioning with Monty Helm. Monty, what has been the most rewarding moment in your career?
Thanks for the question. This was a challenging and a fun one to think about. There's definitely been a lot of different achievements that have been really rewarding in my career. But thinking back, I think the one that I was most excited about was really the launch of sort of my independent career where I was putting down roots after my postdocs. And so that was the chance where I really had the opportunity to start using everything that I learned to forge my own direction in the research topics I was interested in. So one specific thing that comes to mind is when I actually got my own funding to pursue my ideas, and that's I think a great achievement and sort of recognition for any scientist that your ideas are worthy of pursuing. And so that would have to probably be one of the top, for sure.
Thank you, Monty. Our next question is for Ashvia. How did your graduate career prepare you for a career at a national lab?
So I would probably start with in my graduate program, I in fact switched groups after the second year of being in the physics PhD program. And initially I started out with a theory group, and in fact I was so unhappy that I was contemplating perhaps not pursuing graduate career when one of my professors who was in sabbatical the first year contacted me and said, you know, I run a lab at Brookhaven National Lab. It's a small lab, but it's attached to a really large synchrotron where we do X-ray powder diffraction. Would you be interested in coming and seeing the lab and see if you want to work with me? And that was probably the best thing that happened to me, because I really enjoyed the environment there. So my graduate career really prepared me well for working in a large environment where you work with a lot of scientists from all over the world. Basically because I work at a user facility, which is several facilities that are run by the Department of Energy, where researchers can apply for time to use a very specific instrumentation which are hard to find elsewhere. So I get to interact with scientists from US and abroad and also carry out my research in that facility.
Thanks, Ashvia. We'll move on to Mark. Mark, what led you to pursue a career at a national lab?
Well, I was, as I said, in graduate school at Stanford, and ran into a fellow graduate student who told me that he'd been offered a job at Sandia National Labs. And I have to say that at the time I'd never even heard of Sandia, so that was a little bit of an eye-opener. And he told me about some of the things he was going to work on, and it sounded pretty exciting. I had some personal constraints that led me to want to stay in the Bay Area for a time. So I applied for a postdoc, actually, at Sandia, and was fortunate enough to be offered a full-time job instead, which I took. So I guess I'd have to say that my interest in the lab came from what I'd heard from a friend, or actually a couple of friends, and then I learned subsequently about Sandia's connection at the time with AT&T Bell Labs, which raised my impression, my favorable impression of it even further. So that's pretty much why I ended up here, and it's been a great career. I've really enjoyed it, and I'm happy to tell you more about it if you have any questions.
Thanks, Mark. Our second set of questions will begin with Monty again. Monty, how would you suggest a graduate student to prepare for a career at a national lab?
Thanks. Yeah, I think that there's probably, as you heard from our different ways here already of getting into national lab, there are different paths, but there are definitely, I think, some things that you can do that would help. So the first thing is I think you need a solid foundation as far as your CV and references. So a good publication track record, good references from your advisors and colleagues, and a real solid CV is definitely the foundation that you need to be considered. At least for the hiring that I've been involved with here at Pacific Northwest National Lab. Apart from that, I think that one of the shifts that I've been seeing over the last couple of years is, and being in the center that you guys are in are aware of this, is that collaboration is really becoming the name of the game these days. So showing that you have a particular expertise in an area, that you can collaborate in other areas, both to use your expertise to help other people, other groups, and also seek out those partnerships for expertise that you don't have, is an attribute that we look for now when we're hiring staff scientists. So one of the things that I've learned being in a national lab is you really aren't isolated. The lab is investing in you as a resource, and they expect you to be interacting with other scientists and other projects at the lab. And so you have to be able to be flexible and willing to work on other projects and things you may not be specifically interested in, but other people who can really benefit from your expertise. So showing that collaboration, I think, in your graduate work is can be helpful in when you're thinking about a career at a national lab, both if it's an environment that you would like to be in, and also just for showing that in your CV and interview time. The other thing that I would mention that could definitely help is in your own work as a graduate student or a postdoc, are there any partnerships that you can form in the current research that you're doing with the national lab, whether it be working with the neutron source, or here at Pacific Northwest National Lab we have the Center for Molecular Electrocatalysis. So if that's not something that you're a specialist in, engaging in a national lab in an area that you're interested in could be a way to make those connections that are sometimes hard to find at national labs, and get some exposure to what it's like to be here. So that's kind of a broad response with a couple of specific ideas, but as we continue on, I'll be happy to answer other questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Monty. We're still experiencing technical difficulties on our end. I'm going to ask that whoever...
Promoting people within the technical ladder. Now, at Sandia, we also have a parallel management ladder, and people can enter that after some years working at the lab and then continue their career in management, and there are multiple levels of management. I've also known people who've done some management and then gone back to technical work, so it's not an irreversible decision. At Sandia, people tend to stay for quite a long time, at least people with backgrounds like engineering and the physical sciences. There's more volatility in areas like computer programming and electrical engineering, where there's a lot of demand. But I would say that people do not move rapidly from one level to another. You tend to get settled in and build a research program, build your connections or your links throughout the laboratory, and gradually assume more responsibility. I would say if you're really interested in rapidly moving to the top of a company, for example, a private industry or small companies, places like that are going to be, by their nature, more dynamic than national labs, which have long-term missions and really look for continuity to maintain institutional memory in important areas. So it's certainly possible to advance, and I think a lot depends on your personal level of ambition and what you find satisfying.
Thank you very much, Mark, for the input there. Well, that concludes our general questioning, and we'll now move on to the live Q&A. And just to remind the audience who joined us a little late, or are, if you would like to ask a question, please type the question into the question dialog box on your control panel, and I'll try to get through as many questions as possible. So we'll move to the live Q&A, and one of the first questions we had come in was, if someone wants to work in a national lab, is it easier to do a postdoc within the lab first compared to applying for, say, a permanent position? And kind of a follow-up question to that is, do postdocs get hired into a permanent position? So I think we'll start with Monty. If you could provide us with a short answer, and
Sure.
if you need me to repeat the question, I'm happy to do so.
Yeah, the question is one that our postdocs often ask when we interview, and the short answer here at PNNL is it varies depending on the area. So in our particular group, the wet chemistry group, that is often not the case. We do not hire postdocs into staff positions, mostly because we have a lot of postdocs to do the wet chemistry in the labs. We don't have as many staff positions to fill as postdocs as we have. So it's very far and few between when we do. That is not the case in other areas of the lab. Lots of places in other areas of the lab, in the radiochemistry, they hire postdocs with the intention of converting them into staff members. So it can be very dependent on what the particular area is here at the National Lab. One program that we do have that I want to mention, and I think maybe the other national labs have these also, is we do have a postdoc fellowship program where you can make a connection with someone here at the lab that's doing something in your general interest area. Ours is called the Linus Pauling Fellowship. And those are designed to actually be converted into staff member positions. So they're very highly competitive and selective, but they are a way to do a postdoc and that you're funded for your own ideas that are intended to switch into staff positions. Thanks.
Thanks, Monty. Ashvia, do you have anything to add?
I think it's very similar here as well. We have, in fact, 4 named fellowship programs here. They are often, so we have a neutron-specific one, which is called the Scholl Fellowship, and then there are 3 lab-wide, which is Wigner, Weinberg, and Leon Russell. And as Monty said, those are very highly competitive, but often with the stipulation that if you succeed in the program and if you can actually get money to start your own research program, there's a very high probability of becoming a staff member. In the general postdoc area, it varies based on most of the time the funding availability of the group that you're a postdoc at.
Thanks, Ashvia. Mark, how's things like at Sandia?
Well, let's see. So Sandia has something fairly similar. Most postdocs are within a general category. They're hired in to work with a specific principal investigator, and they can be converted to staff, but it is, I would say, not common. Our postdocs can last, they're typically 2 to 3 years, but they can last longer, maybe up to like 5, I think. So we do not view a postdoc as an entry card to a staff position. Like the other 2 labs, we do have a special program. Ours is also named, we call ours the Truman Fellowship, and that, in fact, is a deliberate effort to hire outstanding people. So people come in, they can do their own research, they get pretty generous funding for a couple of years, and if they're successful, the lab does try to hire them. So if you're interested in that program, you can go to Sandia's website and search for Truman Fellowship and get information on that.
Thank you, Mark. Our next question comes to us as, can graduate students apply for internships in the national labs? And what are the requirements to do so? So I think, again, we'll start with Monty.
I believe that there are opportunities. We recently got an announcement from DOE that they were looking for graduate students. There was a program to fund graduate students that wanted to do 4 to 6 months of research with a particular group at a national lab. Those tend to be sometimes focused with specific guidelines. I think the last one was not catalysis driven, so I didn't look into it very closely. So that's all the information I have for that. I do know that there are plenty of undergraduate and high school student internships, but I'm not aware of many more graduate programs.
Okay, thanks, Monty. Ashvia,
Yes.
What are things like for grad students?
Also have the DOE program, and because we're a user facility, that's in fact pretty much every year we have a call that the graduate students who are working on projects that need to use any of the user facilities in the lab can apply for, and that stipulates that the student will spend anywhere between 3 to 6 months at the national lab and the rest of their time at their graduate institution. We also have several other programs. One is called the ORAU, which is the Oak Ridge Associated University, There is a website. If anybody wants to search, they can just Google ORAO, and it will show you all the programs that are available for students. And there is a third program called the GO program, where there are several universities who has signed a memorandum of agreement that their graduate students will come and participate in research involving the National Lab. And I can find out more information if anybody is interested. But there are several graduate programs that takes part in that program as well.
Thanks, Ashvia. Mark, how are things at Sandia for graduate students?
Sandia does not have a specific program for graduate student interns to apply to, but we have a summer intern program, for example. So there are cases where graduate students, through their professor, have come here for a summer and performed collaborative research. And I think there are examples of it being funded either through the professor or through the lab. And by funded, I mean the person's salary actually paid. But most commonly, I think graduate students who work at Sandia come here through a collaboration where the Sandia staff member is working with the professor, and there's an agreement that the research would benefit by being able to use some set of facilities or expertise at Sandia that isn't available at the university. But we do have an extensive summer program, so if you're interested in that, you can go to the website and see job descriptions for student positions.
Thanks, everyone, for the input there. We'll move on to our next question. Actually, Mark, you brought this up about how grad students are paid. How are the scientists actually paid in the national labs? Does those salaries come from individual grant funding, or is that how does that actually work?
Well, it can happen a number of ways. So Sandia has a very large range of project sizes. So the largest programs are, multi-million-dollar programs that are headed by some senior management, and people work on individual tasks within those programs, and they're paid out of them. The sort of opposite end of that is a more academic model where a PI would write a proposal to a government funding agency, for example, some arm of the Department of Energy, and receives funding directly that pays some portion of their salary and can be used also to support postdocs and other staff. So I think an important thing, misconception, I guess, to dispel is, at least as far as I know, the national labs, the DOE national labs, by and large, it's not like there's a pipeline of money that comes in and just pays everybody's salary. We are not government employees. We're actually contractors. And so the money has to come into the lab from a government agency, or it can also come from private industry. But if you're part of a big program, then that covers all of your salary. I happen to work in an area where I do mostly basic research, and so I write research proposals that cover not only my own salary, but salary of other people. So you can be in a model where you actually do spend a significant amount of time doing proposal writing.
Thanks, Mark. Ashvia or Monty, anything to add?
I would just add most of our business model is pretty much similar to what Mark just said, that you have to write your own grant, with the exception of the user facility, because we also have a service component to our job where a large fraction of our time is in fact spent in helping others do their science. We are paid out of one central grant, which essentially runs the user facility. So for example, we have 2 neutron sources, and both the neutron sources are run from one grant that also pays our salaries.
And I'll just sort of reiterate what's already been said, but in case it wasn't clear, at least at Pacific Northwest National Lab, we do have to cover 100% of our salaries. So it is different than, say, a university or definitely having tenure. If you can't cover 100% of your salary in some way, you don't get paid. And so that can happen by a number of different ways, like Mark and Ashvia have all already mentioned. In addition to research funding and grants, there are also opportunities to get funding to, say, do management duties or do lab duties here. And so there are other ways to help piece together 100% of your time for coverage, and many scientists here do that also. So it's often a common model to work on multiple projects to piece together 100% of your time over the course of the year.
Thanks, everyone, for the information. Our next question is, how do these national labs positions differ from, say, NRC fellowship type labs, such as China Lake or the Naval Research Lab? Is the postdoc position similar, or do they differ by a large degree? And I think we'll let Ashvia start the conversation.
Well, the one big difference that I am aware of is most of the NRC postdocs, you have to be a U.S. citizen to be eligible for it, whereas in most of them, I'm going to guess India is an exception, but at Oak Ridge or other national labs, that is not always a requirement. But other than that, after that part, the fellowship programs that we have are not very different in terms of daily activities from the NRC fellowships.
Monty or Mark, anything to add?
I'm not particularly familiar, so I don't have anything to add. Thanks.
Thanks.
I can add something to that. Let's see. So the Naval Research Lab and China Lake, there's some other labs. These are Department of Defense labs, and the people that work there are government employees. So those labs receive their money directly from the Department of Defense. You know, another example of this would be the National Institutes of Standards and Technology. That's a Department of Commerce lab. They also get their money pretty much straight from Congress. So they may write proposals, but they're probably it's probably very limited. Now at Sandia, let's see. So I think the question came up about whether or not you need to be a U.S. citizen. That depends on the area. I mean, postdocs typically do not need to be U.S. citizens. We have plenty of them who are not. Staff members can be non-U.S. citizens, but it's rare, and the reason for that is that we are a national security lab, and you have to have a clearance to work here on any extended basis. Now, just a caveat, in my own work area, we have several foreign nationals who are staff members. They don't have clearances, and they just work on projects and for customers who don't require any kind of security clearance. So that's possible. But they're a pretty small fraction of the overall technical staff, which at Sandia numbers probably around 3,000 people.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our next question. So I know our panelists have spent most of their time in national labs. Do you have any advice for, say, postdocs or grad students who do an internship with you and they possibly want to go on to an academic position? Do you think a position at a national lab is a good transition to academia? And we'll start with Monty.
I think it definitely can be, for sure, particularly if it's gaining expertise in an area that is different from your PhD that could be particularly useful for the research that you're going to be proposing to do in academics. So say, for example, you know that you want to be using a particular technique, like say the neutron source that where Ashvia works. in your research that you're going to do in academics, doing a postdoc there to gain the context and expertise would be a huge benefit for when you go and start applying for those academic jobs. So slightly situation dependent. Here we have a lot of inorganic, organometallic, synthetic chemists, and they fare, I think, equally well with their academic peers that do postdocs in academics when they go to apply for academic jobs.
Thanks, Monty. Mark and Ashvia, anything to add?
Let's see. I would concur with that. I would say, so at least with regard to Sandia, I've had postdocs who've gone on to academic positions, and I think that you would want to choose a national lab where there is a person working in the area of interest to you who has some name recognition or who is working within a facility that has some name recognition. So a good example of that at Sandia is the combustion research facility, where there are numerous staff who are known internationally for their expertise in various parts of the combustion discipline. And it's strongly encouraged there to publish and to attend technical meetings, and the people are visible within that academic discipline. So that could be a good move if you wanted to do to become a professor in a mechanical engineering department or chemie where you want to do combustion work. I would say in other areas it just depends. You know, getting a job in academia is pretty darn difficult these days. There's a lot of competition. So frankly, I would say if you're a chemist in a traditional discipline, I would look pretty hard at the reputation of the person at a national lab before deciding that that's where you want to do a postdoc, because frankly, your postdoc mentor can do an awful lot for you. At least their own name recognition can be very helpful when you're competing against a large number of people that are coming from top departments. So you'd have to kind of take it as a case-by-case basis.
I don't have much more to
Thanks,
that.
Mark.
Apart from that, you know, in the last 3 years, I would say about 50% of the postdocs in my directorate has gone on to academic jobs. So it's a 50-50. We have a fairly large number of people who end up in other national labs as well.
Thanks, Ashvia. Our next question came through an email to us, and it is, I read recently in CNN that postdoc jobs are declining in federal R&D centers, primarily due to the decrease in funding. What can you tell us about the competitiveness of landing a postdoc in a national lab and the best way to get your CV seen? And I think we'll start with Mark.
That's a good question. Let's see. I'm not sure I really have enough information to comment on whether the number of postdocs is declining. It's a fact of life that research funding in the United States is not growing by leaps and bounds. It's fairly flat right now. That said, in the area I work in, for example, we like to hire postdocs because frankly, it's a great way to get a lot of work done in laboratory. Postdocs work hard and cost us less than to pay a full-time staff member. So there's a real economic driver for doing this. Let's see. In terms of getting your resume in front of someone, what I would not do, at least if you're applying to Sandia, is go to the website and start looking for postdoc postings. You may well find them, but it will be difficult to tell who is actually posting the job. So what I tend to advise people to do is look at the lab, try to locate people through literature searches who are doing things that are of interest to you. And the best way to do that is search the literature. And then when you've located someone who is active in the field you're interested in and has a good publication track record, then I would simply contact them directly, and you can get their email address right off of one of their journal articles. and tell them what you're interested in. Personally, if I'm looking at a postdoc application and I get lots of them, I want to have some confidence that the person has really thought about what they would like to do for me. So I would recommend that in a cover letter you say that I'm familiar with your research, and give specific areas. And you might say something like, I'm particularly intrigued by this work. I am interested in that also and have certain skills that I think would be beneficial. And in particular, if you have a postdoc opening, I'd like to work on this. I would be very specific. I don't think anybody would be put off by that. They might not want to hire somebody who wants to do what you're proposing, but to me, it's a real sign of initiative and somebody taking the time to figure out what it is that I do. So resumes, they're important. Cover letter is very important, and the most important is making contact with the person, a specific individual, and finding out if they have a postdoc position available, and if they don't, asking if they would forward to someone else in the lab who they think might be interested.
Thanks, Mark. Monty and Ashvia, do you have anything to add?
I could add, just reiterate what Mark said very strongly. I think he really nailed it on the head. We really look closely at people who are specifically interested in what we're doing. We don't worry too much if you don't have particular skills in our group, as long as you come in aware of what's needed and willing and excited to learn it. So electrochemistry is not, in our group, one skill that our postdocs come in with a great deal of experience. But as long as they know that that's something that they want to do and they're excited about, we consider them. And so showing that that's a specific interest is important to us. And then the only other new thing I could add is that contact from a PhD advisor is also something that's really crucial for us. We look at, when we advertise for a postdoc, and again, the website is very not useful. You'll just see a posting for a general postdoc without much specifics, but we send out emails to sort of the big professors in the field and say, hey, we're going to have a postdoc opening. Do you have any students that you would like to recommend for this? And so making your advisor, keenly aware of what you want to do and where you'd like to go would be really helpful. So if they do get those emails, they can recommend you.
The only thing I would add is the rest of the Oak Ridge National Lab actually worked exactly in the way that Monty and Mark described, except, again, because we're at a user facility, we have very specific needs when we're looking for postdocs, and so we have our job posting on our Oak Ridge Neutron Sciences Directorate webpage, which says careers, and it really is far more specific than general postdocs, so that would be another thing to look at, but of course directly contacting people is always a good idea.
Blake, can I add one thing about the previous question about persons who would be doing postdocs or considering them at national labs and then wanting to go on to academia?
Sure.
So a sort of general thing to be aware of is that within the national lab system, there are labs that are sponsored by actually different parts of the government or different parts of DOE. So, for example, Sandia, Los Alamos, and Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories are really under the aegis of the National Nuclear Security Agency, NNSA. There are other laboratories that come under what's called the Office of Science. And that would include, correct me if I'm wrong, Monty, but it would include PNNL, Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, Brookhaven, Argonne, and I'm not sure about Oak Ridge.
Oak Ridge, mostly. About 90% of our activities are BES related.
Right. So BES is the office called Basic Energy Sciences that funds basic research. And what they're interested in is, top quality, journal published, PI-driven research, and those are probably the best labs to go to if you really are intent on pursuing an academic career.
Thanks for the addition, Mark and Ashvia. We're starting to run low on time, so I think we have enough time for maybe one more question. what kind of barriers or handicaps are there for foreign nationals when they try to apply for either research time at a national lab or to become a, say, postdoc or a full-time staff scientist? Maybe Monty can start this conversation.
I'm sorry, but could you repeat that one more time?
Yes, no problem. What kind of barriers or handicaps are for foreigners to get into national labs? So if a foreigner wants to do research at a national lab or to become a postdoc or a staff scientist.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good question, and I think it varies depending on the project that they're working at. So here at PNNL, there's different levels of clearance. So working in a lot of the projects that are funded through basic energy sciences, like Mark was just talking about, doesn't require any clearance, and I actually think it's really beneficial to come to the national lab because they will handle all of the paperwork, all the visa paperwork and everything. We have specialists that their job is to help facilitate foreign nationals to work here at the lab. That being said, there are projects in the National Security Directorate here that they wouldn't necessarily qualify for, and there would be, I don't even know if it's possible to get over hurdles to work in those. In general, if it's basic science here, you're probably okay, but other than that, it would be really dependent on what the work is.
Ashvia, anything to add, or Mark?
I am a foreign citizen. I actually am still a citizen of Bangladesh, so there are a few countries where it's a little bit harder than most others, and you can probably guess who they are. But by and large, when the programs are run by basic energy sciences, we don't have any restriction. In fact, I would say a very large fraction of my colleagues who work at the Neutron Scattering Directorate are foreigners, and we have representation from pretty much every corner of the world.
Blake, let me just get some clarity on the question. Was the question regarding any employment at the National Lab or a postdoc specifically?
I think it's any employment. So either as a postdoc or as a staff scientist.
Okay. Well, let me address the postdoc situation first. So at Sandia, you don't need a clearance to be a postdoc. Some people actually do have them. You might be aware that Sandia has two sites. The main laboratory is in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then I'm at the one in Livermore, California. Livermore tends to have more postdocs than New Mexico, and there's, I'm sure, a higher percentage of them that are non-U.S. citizens. And so our program here is pretty well developed for handling foreign nationals. We know how to do it. We're accustomed to it. New Mexico less so, but I'm sure that they have foreign national postdocs. As far as being a permanent staff member, I'll go back to my earlier comment, which is that by and large, full-time staff members are U.S. citizens. There are staff, though, who are permanent residents, not necessary to have a green card, but I think it's strongly encouraged. In fact, I think you have to be in the process of getting one in order to be considered as a staff member if you're not a U.S. citizen. Now, not being a U.S. citizen means you would not get a clearance. I think there are a few very rare exceptions to those, and so you would be restricted to working in areas that do not require that. Now, at Sandia, that's probably a much smaller percentage of the overall projects than it is at PNNL or Oak Ridge, for example, and that's just by the nature of the laboratory. And I think the same is true of Lawrence Livermore National Lab and probably of Los Alamos as well.
Okay. Thanks for the additional input there. We're now running short on time, so if we could have each panelist give a quick 1-minute take-home message. And Mark, I'll start with you since you have a previous engagement.
Well, all the caveats aside from what all of us have said, I would say that the national labs are still a great place to work. Frankly, you can probably do just about anything here at Sandia if you can get somebody to pay for it, which basically means it's not too different from academia. From the point of view of a postdoc, I think it's also quite an outstanding place to be. We have very interdisciplinary research programs. Things tend to be sort of interdisciplinary, multi-member, multi-discipline efforts, team efforts, which is different from what you would experience in an academic postdoc. We're not stovepiped that way. So if you're interested in that kind of environment and also want to use, excellent facilities and equipment, then I think a national lab is really a good place to launch a career.
Thanks, Mark. Ashvia, if you would like to give a summarizing point or take-home message.
Sure. I would say from my career, one of the most important things for anybody who wants to pursue a career in science, whether it's academic or national lab, is to really be passionate about what you do, because I think that is something that really shows when you apply for a job, when you talk to people, that you are really interested in the activities that you're involved in. And that is very important because you need to be happy at the end of the day. And National Lab gives you an opportunity to work on just about anything that you might be interested in, because we have such a varied program in all the science, physical, biosciences, computer sciences, mathematics. So definitely look into the National Lab career, because it is different from academics, but it's also very rewarding.
Thanks, Ashvia. And Monty, if you want to provide us with a short take-home message.
You bet. I agree completely with my co-panelists. They really hit the nail on the head. So I'll just add, if it is something that you decide you want to pursue, making contact with someone that is specifically doing what you're interested in is a great way to get your foot in the door, whether it's your graduate work or doing a postdoc, and really targeting what you want to gain experience in and become an expert in. Find out who's working at a national lab that's doing that and get a hold of them.
Thanks, Monty. I'd like to now take this time to thank everyone for joining us today. Terribly sorry about the technical difficulties we had earlier in the web broadcast. I'd like to thank our panelists, Monty Helm, Ashvia Huck, and Mark Allendorf, for giving us insights into the National Lab environment. I would also like to thank the members of the Student Council for Innovation who helped put the webinar on today: Lauren Fulmore, Zaid Ma, Ryan Frederick, Ryan Manser, and Betty Maddox for helping to prepare the webinar. If you enjoyed our webinar today and would like more information on future webinars, please visit us at sustainablematerialschemistry.org or follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Recordings of today's webinar will also be made available at sustainablematerialschemistry.org. If you have any follow-up questions for our panelists, if you would please send your emails to our email, or post the questions on Facebook or LinkedIn, and we'll make sure that our panelists see those questions, and we'll hopefully get some answers back. Again, thanks for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.